What about the fruit of the Spirit? Consider the parable of the talents in the Gospel of Matthew, or the parable of the sheep and the goats. Both of them have good news of a good future to those who have been faithful. On the one hand, you've been faithful with little, I'll set you over much. Go, you're going to rule over whole cities. Again, that's not retirement, that's a promotion. Step 3 is what comes after the promotion. And then the other one, enter into your master's joy. Enter into your master's joy. And we saw joy back in step 0. It's the joy of the Lord, and it's the joy of the church that, with its own good news, that drives it to announce it to new people. But joy is also step 3. Joy is what we inherit fully. You're not feeling all shaken up and disoriented in the New Jerusalem. You're home, and you really know you're home. You're on the job, and you're ready for the job. You're not feeling insecure as somebody who's new on the job. You're feeling comfortable and challenged and ready. So, joy strikes me as fruit. And it's on the basis of the faithfulness and the goodness of those who inherit, right? Well done, good and faithful servant. Goodness is fruit of the Spirit. Goodness is fruit that prepares us, and we get to put to work when the Master returns. We get to put it to work now, but we really get to put it to work later. Some controversies. Well, Wesleyans teach entire sanctification. 2 Corinthians 7:1. Make your holiness perfect. Make it fulfilled. That sounds like entire sanctification. Whatever Paul's talking about, he's talking about becoming the kind of people whose lives aren't marked by falling short in any way, who are entirely worthy of the task. And Wesley, unlike both Catholics and other Protestants, sees this as a real possibility in this life before death. This probably isn't news to you at a Free Methodist church, but you might locate this teaching and this debate as a step 3 dispute. When are we finally ready? For Wesley, there's no necessary reason that we should not be fully ready. The Catholic position is that sanctification continues to happen after we die, because it's obvious that people die in a state of unreadiness. We're identified with Christ, but we're not ready. Not ready for that promotion when our lives end. So how does God ready us for the task? Well, God must continue preparing people who have been on the way. And where would that happen? Where are they purged of the qualities that make them unready? Purgatory, which Wesley called paradise, but understood in roughly the same way, both being very step 2 conscious traditions. Death seeming like often a kind of arbitrary event in someone's life. Tower falls on you and 17 others, and you all perish. So God arranged that because that was just at the right time that you were ready? No. That kind of thing just happens. But if that kind of thing just happens and life's work matters, then there must be an opportunity to continue after our death to be ready to inherit. And that's where the doctrine of purgatory comes from. Purgatory is not where people go when they aren't good enough for heaven and not bad enough for hell. Purgatory is where saved people go, step 2 Christians go, to finish out step 2 and inherit step 3. That's what purgatory means. Luther and Calvin both understand this step 3 to be attained at the resurrection of the dead. So you die in step 2, maybe more holy than earlier, but still in process. For both Luther and Calvin, you're still in process. So Wesley wants to move step 3 potentially before death, although not necessarily before death. Catholics want to move it into the afterlife, but not necessarily at the resurrection. Lutherans and Calvinists want to put it at the resurrection. Okay? All three of those positions are going to change how you view the present and how you view your responsibilities in the present. And that's why this isn't just teaching, this is ethics. This has to do with how we act now. Another, not uniquely Wesleyan position, but goes along with the Arminian position that Wesleyans share, along with Catholics and Orthodox and others, Anglicans, will teach that you can turn away from this goal, you can turn away from this identity, and you can lose your inheritance. You can, if you like, lose your salvation. And there are plenty of warnings not to in the New Testament. Wesleyans can regard them as genuine warnings of a genuine possibility, a genuine risk. That having crossed into step 1, step 2, you can turn away and not reach the goal. Hebrews 6 would be a text that would be used often to do that. For both Luther and Calvin, however, they have these stronger doctrines of predestination where God will see us through. What God has begun, God will see to its finish. Who can separate us from the love of Christ? So as we wrap up, I want to look at how focusing on these various steps of salvation has really shaped our different traditions, especially our different, what are now denominational traditions. The Calvinist tradition strikes me as a really step 0 tradition. What I mean by that is that in focusing on God and the sovereignty of God, Calvinism and the whole Reformed tradition ended up pushing everything into God's eternal sovereign will, focusing their energies on step 0, on God's eternal predestining and God's agency behind everything. So Calvinism is really a step 0 tradition. Of course, it focuses on all the steps, but it roots them all in God's priority. Universalism is another step 0 tradition, not really in the mainstream of Christianity. Nevertheless, it's a daughter of Calvinism. And universalism is then also a step 0 tradition. It roots everything that follows in God's eternal will to save everything. Other traditions are really shaped by a focus on step 1. The Lutheran tradition strikes me as a step 1 tradition because it's so focused on justification by grace alone through faith alone, by that relationship of fundamental trust. The Anglican tradition has a lot in common with the Lutheran tradition, as well as a Constantinian focus. And I've mentioned that Constantinianism is a kind of step 1 focus. Our baptismal identity really defines us. Well, the Constantinian tradition's focus really is on step 1. The debate between Arminians and Calvinists is in a way a debate between step 0, focus on predestining and on prevenient grace, and a countervailing Arminian focus on human agency in responding to that grace. So Arminian traditions, especially the original Arminian tradition, strikes me as a step 1 tradition. This is to say that the focus on regeneration, on God's role in regeneration and on ours, and the immediate and lasting effects of that regeneration really shape the consciousness of these step 1 traditions. Whereas step 2 traditions focus on the process of growth and holiness. The Wesleyan holiness tradition is obviously here a step 2 tradition. I'm going to call the Radical Reformation Anabaptist traditions also fundamentally step 2 traditions. Of course, step 1, baptism, is fundamental, but it so describes the long walk of discipleship that follows it, that it kind of pulls step 1 into step 2. And if there's a step 3 tradition in this list, I want to point to the Eastern Orthodox Church, which focuses on the realization of all things. If you step into an Orthodox church, you're surrounded by icons of the saints. And Orthodox are fond of describing worship services as stepping into the heavenly scene where everything is done. So Orthodoxy has a liturgical focus that really pulls it into step 3. Holy Communion is the centerpiece, as it is in lots of other traditions, but it's understood as the communion of the living and the dead, of Christ and the church, of all the relationships that we talked about earlier, Torrance's relationships that Jesus has brought us into, as if they're already accomplished, already complete. Of course, worshipers know that they aren't, but they're anticipating that completion and in a way enjoying a little of it in the present. I was asked once when I was giving this talk if there's a well-rounded tradition that isn't so fundamentally shaped by one or another step. And as I've thought about it, you'll notice that Roman Catholics aren't on this list. I think they, among our traditions, have contributed to all the different steps. And so their identity isn't fundamentally shaped by one or another of them. It doesn't have as much invested in one particular step. And I'm going to send you off with a few verses from Galatians 6:14. Far be it from me to glory, except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the world has been crucified to me. There's step 1, huh? And I to the world. For neither circumcision counts for anything nor uncircumcision, but new creation. After all this controversy about circumcision, he says, whether you're circumcised or not doesn't really matter. New creation is what matters. Step 3. Peace and mercy be upon all who walk by this rule, upon the Israel of God. And that is walking by that rule, living in that new identity and walking towards that goal. That's step 2. But walking is the point. Walking is where he leads you in Galatians. And walking is what we do.